Hello, family. Good afternoon. Good to see everybody tonight. You know, my wife, Dana, is an expert at reading faces, especially mine. She knows just what I'm thinking just by the expressions that I make on my face. Sometimes without even knowing that I'm even making a face, and especially when I'm trying not to make any expressions, she can still figure me out. We've all heard that expression. It's written all over your face. Well, what do you think about when you actually think of actually seeing the look on God's face? This is our second study in the series we're calling Divine Applause. We're kind of taking a look at how we view God and consequently how He views us. And the thought of God standing nearby and listening in on our daily lives can bring comfort, or it can bring outright terror. It can evoke shame, or it can connect with a part of us that really wants to please God. So how do we deal with this reality, and how we deal with this reality will actually shape our walk with God. It really all depends upon our perspective of how we see God's face. Some may view God as one who pops in and pops out of view, catching us off guard. If you believe this perspective, though, it will cause you to keep looking over your shoulder, wondering what God might be thinking about you in any given moment. Others assume God only pays attention when we mess up, as if life is this kind of highly dysfunctional game of hide and seek. And really, I can't think of a more oppressive way to live life. It's easy to think God is kind of put off by our flaws and our mistakes. In situations where we don't measure up even to our own standards, we might assume God's countenance, shifts immediately from a smile to a frown. Some may even picture God outright turning away from us, or reaching for something He can use to punish us with. If this were true of God, we'd be justified in wanting to keep our distance from Him. But the reality is that God is watching, speaks of His care. It speaks of His concern. It speaks of His love for us. His watchful ways are intended to inspire us, not frighten us. This is one of the key mind shifts that's necessary to actually hearing God's applause, to actually seeing the smile on His face. And it all has to do with how we picture God's face. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had a daily visitor who walked around and spent time with them, God. And between visits, God was watching them, caring for them. How amazing would it be to have those walk and talk sessions today? To see God's face up close and to hear His voice. When God expressed pleasure towards Abel and the gift that he brought, it was clear to both Abel and his brother Cain how God felt about it. Cain also had brought a gift, and the difference in God's reaction was apparent. God saw the two boys and their gifts differently, and Cain didn't know how to handle that. I wonder how Cain understood God's feelings. Did God speak from the clouds, or did He walk up and speak to the brothers face to face? If it was a direct encounter, did God's facial expression change when He looked from Abel to Cain? Maybe Abel's face lit up because he saw the delight in God. We don't know how quickly that FaceTime diminished after Adam and Eve were banished from the garden. We do know that eventually the separation between God and the people He created caused the common experience of face-to-face walking and talking with God to disappear. God was no longer visible to His children. And at some point it became dangerous to try to see God's face. Encountering His glory was too much even for an earthly being to survive. When Moses met with God on the mountain, he didn't see God's face, but he did get close. If you remember, God covered Moses with His hand to protect him. But whatever Moses saw caused his face to shine like a floodlight. And when he returned from the mountain and the people saw his glow, it alarmed them, it shocked them. But soon they saw that, he was safe. And they learned that he had had an encounter with the living God. You see, having God's attention was to their benefit. God told the people through Moses in Numbers chapter 6, verse 25 and 26, he said, "The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace." You'll dive into this passage in just a few minutes in your groups. God's children sought comfort from the sight of God's face. Notice the words of King David in Psalm 4:6. He says, "Let the light of your face shine upon us." And again in Psalm 27 verse 8, he says, "My heart says of you, seek his face. Your face, Lord, I will seek." The thought of seeing God's face was not frightening to David. He longed to see the face of God. Even when David was dead to rights in his sin with Bathsheba, he longed to be in the very presence of God. In his great confession in Psalm 51, David pleads with God starting in verse 9. He says, "Hide your face from my sins and blot out my transgressions. But God, create in me a new heart, a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." Now listen to what he says next. He says, "Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me." You see, David even relished the idea that God was watching him even in his sin. And David didn't want to lose that close connection that he had with God. He knew God's presence was a benefit to him. God has his eyes fixed on you too, which is always in your favor. In our remaining studies, we're going to explore what it means that the Father turns his eyes toward us. And hopefully you won't be rattled any longer by the idea that God is watching you. God pays close attention to each of us, which should be a source of comfort and of confidence. He doesn't keep watch so he can catch you doing something wrong. He's watching because he's interested in you. And what an awesome reality that is. That the God that created everything in the universe is especially interested in you. God bless and enjoy your study together tonight.